He felt uneasy, creeped out, when he noticed that Rehnquist, who'd looked like death swearing him in, had already disappeared from the platform. But the words continued to float up the teleprompter, and he wasn't going to lose his momentum. He was about to banish anybody's notion that this second administration of his would be going in for small ball. It is the policy of the United States to seek and support the growth of democratic movements and institutions in every nation and culture, with the ultimate goal of ending tyranny in our world. He'd said it. Freedom and security were one and the same, and you couldn't have too much of either. The applause seemed somehow to drift away instead of toward him, as if riding an easterly breeze from here at the Capitol to the Lincoln Memorial. He wondered who on the dais or out in the crowd knew that he'd been playing on Lincoln's words when he just said, "No one is fit to be a master, and no one deserves to be a slave," let alone knew that he'd read fully 5 biographies of the Link, even he got a nickname, in the 4 years he and Laura had lived in the house halfway up the mall and over to the right. He caught a glimpse of Carrie at the end of the platform, his face looking weirdly puffed out, as if it had stolen whatever flesh was disappearing from Rehnquist's. Too far away to see it in detail, he could well enough envision the disappointed, more in sorrow than in anger look his vanquished opponent would be exhibiting in reaction to the words just uttered, that pained expression of his, sort of a sigh that always meant to say, "It's more complicated than that." He knew Dick's pretty opponent wouldn't be here. The protocol never required the defeated VP candidate to show up, but he'd heard that Edwards, now out of the Senate, was still in the city, over at the Georgetown mansion he'd bought with all those trial lawyer fees that would finally start shrinking if they got tort reform through this session. America's influence is not unlimited, but fortunately for the oppressed, America's influence is considerable, and we will use it confidently in freedom's cause. And he would use his political capital, what he'd accumulated in November by kicking Kerry's rear in both Ohio and Florida. He would go beyond tort reform and throw himself into Social Security and immigration. A light covering of snow stretched across the mall like a tarp on the field at the Arlington ballpark. Gazing upon it and thinking for a second of the team he'd owned 15 years ago, he felt his resentment toward last year's foes fall away and be replaced by a surge of confidence, a sense that all things great and small were being given to him. He could hear that his delivery was smooth, the one word that had made him stumble in the rehearsals, susceptible, having been replaced by prone. Democratic reformers facing repression, prison, or exile can know. America sees you for who you are, the future leaders of your free country. The last shall be first. The Bible is everywhere in this speech, directly or just beneath the surface. And if the upcoming nod to the Quran seems obligatory, it also has what Kissinger, had he just seen his wheezing, shrinking hulk here, would call the additional advantage of being true. He was going to re-win this war he'd already won once, because when you came down to it, he had more in common with and more insight into the most radical Muslim who read his Quran than the unbeliever who never opened his Bible. He would wager that when everybody on this platform had bowed their heads a few minutes ago, not more than 1 person in 10 actually started praying. The rest had just kept thinking about who they'd been able to sit a row in front of and who they'd had to sit a row behind. He could feel it again, had to fight it, the sudden shift from merriment to irritability, from runner's high to cramp. The flight and crash he experienced a dozen times an hour. The fast, exhausting alternation he knew he had to battle and often didn't want to. He'd fight it now with words that had been written for him, but words that he could also utter from the heart, the same way he had prayed for real during the invocation. Head up, he speaks. America, in this young century, proclaims liberty throughout all the world and to all the inhabitants thereof.